Welcome to Wednesday, October 10th. I'm going to be joined momentarily by Scott Bennett. I've been texting with Scott and he's just a bit tied up at the moment. We're going to be talking today about Covington and Burling, a law firm that contains so many lawyers that seem to be connected to the deep state. We have to ask the question, is it itself a deep state law firm? Of course, Eric Holder is an attorney there. Roger Zakheim, who Scott has told us about in the past. Roger's father, Dov Zakheim, is closely associated with the George W. Bush administration, and he is allegedly an expert on Iran, Iraq, all kinds of things. Many people have said that these guys are somehow connected to Israel, dual citizenship. I have no knowledge or information of that. Certainly Zakheim, Dov, these seem to be Israeli and or Jewish names. There's a lot of people who like to use that as an implication in and of itself. I personally am less convinced that there is an entire country of evil people than I am that there are evil people of all nationalities and religions, and that 9/11 and some of the other intense crimes that we have seen have been executed by groups whose ethnicities and nationalities run the gamut. Scott has joined us. Let me just add the screen share for you, Scott, and we'll get underway here. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, Jason. I had the comedic relief of watching one of Ali Stuckey's little videos of how a feminist dates, and I have to admit it made me laugh.
I'm not familiar with that person, but perhaps we can talk some more about that in the future. I've just been prepping the audience, Scott. We're going to be talking, of course, about Covington and Burling. This is a law firm you've spoken about quite a bit in the past. You have some personal experience with Roger Zakheim, who, as I understand, is the son of Dov Zakheim, a neocon Bush advisor who is closely linked to the war in Iraq, the events of 9/11, the country of Israel, so many different things. I do want to remind everyone who perhaps hasn't seen you on the program before, Scott, they can follow you on Twitter. You are on Twitter at Army PSYOP. Of course, you're an Army intelligence veteran. You worked at Booz Allen Hamilton. You were wrongly imprisoned. Your rights were violated and trampled, and you've become a whistleblower, specifically a shell game whistleblower, and people can get your book. They can go, what's the direct link to get to your website?
Shellgamewhistleblower.com.
And they can read your book about 9/11 truth. They can read the book, Shell Game, about how you expose the links between the intelligence agencies and private industry. What can you tell us today about Covington and Burling? I know you've spoken about it before, Scott, but some of this stuff is so complex. I think it's very useful for me, certainly, and I would presume the audience as well, to go over these things again, to make these connections again. This is the law firm that's defending General Michael Flynn in what
Yes.
most people would believe, and I as well, is the guy's been railroaded. Michael Flynn, by my estimation, is a hero, a guy who has been trying to do the right thing for his entire career, exposing Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama for deliberately funding and creating ISIS and trying to help President Trump. Why would he have Covington and Burling represent him?
Well, that's the $1 million question, Jason, and I'm glad you mentioned that to start out with, because the best way to really understand Covington and Burling and this whole drama is to start with filling it in and working towards the middle. So there's a right side, which is the present, and there's the left side, which is the past. So let me just kind of jump back and forth between them, and starting off with General Michael Flynn. General Michael Flynn is represented by Covington and Burling. There's an attorney there. I sent you the slide on him. They've approached Michael Flynn and convinced him to take a plea deal with Robert Mueller and his investigation. Covington and Burling, I've said, and I've communicated to the Trump people and many other members of Congress, is unqualified to be representing Michael Flynn because it's a party in treason against the United States, specifically aiding and abetting traitors and terrorists by financing terrorism through Swiss banks, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Morocco, Bahrain, and other Sunni Salafist, Wahhabist countries. And Michael Flynn has Covington and Burling representing him, which is an anomaly. It's a fraud on the court, I would even say. It's inappropriate for the court. It's inappropriate for Michael Flynn to have them and take any advice from them. It's an ineffective assistance of counsel, 2255, waiting to happen. And that's when an attorney represents you, as in my case. My case is still an appeal on 2255, ineffective assistance of counsel, because Donna Shalala's nephew, David Shalala, was my attorney, and Donna Shalala was the president of the Clinton Foundation. She was tied in closely with the Clintons, and the Clinton Foundation was also aiding and abetting terrorism by money laundering using Covington and Burling.
Amazing.
So if I get a little loud and passionate, it's because this has been burned into my DNA from adrenaline.
I like that about you.
Yeah. Well, Covington and Burling is if you draw it up on a big whiteboard, you've got Michael Flynn, Covington and Burling. You've got Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton State Department, Covington and Burling. Stuart Eisenstadt was identified by WikiLeaks and other communications as having a close advisory position with the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton State Department. So Covington and Burling's there, right smack dab in the middle of the State Department. Now, it also has connections to the Department of Justice during the State Department run under Clinton, and that was Lanny Breuer and Eric Holder, the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General. Before they became government Department of Justice Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General, Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer worked for Covington and Burling. Covington and Burling was a big law firm in Washington, D.C. It has international partners. It represents Saudi Arabia, Swiss banks, and international stuff. Mm-hmm. So Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer worked for Covington and Burling, then came over to the Justice Department and represented Covington and Burling's interests against the Constitution, against the American people, against Brad Birkenfeld, against myself, against United States military officers and enlisted who were fighting in the war on terror. And they worked against our interests by aiding and abetting the financing of terrorists. They did it through cover-up. They did it through coordination to imprison whistleblowers and bury information. And specifically, Covington and Burling, working through Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer, defended their client, Saudi Arabia and Union Bank of Switzerland, by imprisoning Brad Birkenfeld in a prison and burying his 19,000 Swiss bank accounts, which had hundreds of millions of dollars that were being used for black budget financing of terrorism. Brad Birkenfeld was imprisoned. He was the whistleblower that brought all of this information over. Edward Snowden, who worked at Booz Allen Hamilton in the Hawaii office, before he was in Hawaii, he was a CIA analyst. He was part of the CIA surveillance of Birkenfeld. That's in the Oliver Stone movie where they depict a Pakistani banker being entrapped in a DUI situation. Right. That was Brad Birkenfeld. Brad was put into a DUI situation, put into a Swiss jail. The next day, a CIA agent came into his jail cell, flashed his CIA badge, and got him out. Brad then left and came over to the United States. I think he thought he was going to be assassinated, and he tried to dump all of his material onto the Department of Justice, the IRS, the SEC, and it wasn't until the Senate gave him a subpoena and allowed him to come in and disclose all of this behind closed doors, incidentally. Then after he dumped all of his information and gave them all the intel, they classified it. They said, this is now a closed hearing, you can't use this. Then they charged him with what he disclosed, and they threw him in prison.
So wait a minute, they classified it after he disclosed it and then charged him with disclosing classified information?
Yeah, because he tried to...
How does that work?
He tried to make the defense by saying, well, it was all hush-hush and closed. It wasn't done, with cameras and such. But he tried to say, I've disclosed all of this information as a whistleblower to the Senate about there's a Russian a Russian tycoon named Igor Alenikov, who had popped up in the State Department's uh, channels of communication years before. So he was a
Right.
target by CIA and State Department. Probably, one of the people that had a lot of resources taken out of the former Soviet times. He was a multi-millionaire, and he lived in Southern California. They were trying to get information on him. Brad was his personal lawyer, brought him diamonds over in toothpaste tubes. This was all put out on State Department WikiLeaks emails. WikiLeaks disclosed the State Department emails describing Igor Leningoff and diamonds in the toothpaste and Brad Birkenfeld. So this was on the radar of the official United States government, United States State Department under Hillary Clinton in 2008 and 2009. And when Brad had went in to testify and give all this material, they then charged him, and he said, "Wait a minute, you can't charge me. I gave this." And they said, "No, you can't use that as a defense. It's been classified. Take a plea deal." And he took a plea deal, and that was his biggest mistake of his life. But the saving grace was he met me when I was thrown into the same prison, or conveniently positioned in the same prison. And all of the material he downloaded to me, I downloaded into the report Shell Game, which people can see on the website, shellgamewhistleblower.com. And it was a military report because I was still a military officer. I'd been shanghaied and illegally thrown into a civilian prison for filling out a military housing form as a military officer, flying down on a military plane. It was the first time in the history of the United States they've ever gotten away with it. I thought it was a test. I thought it was a training exercise to see if I was going to be on a top secret mission, and they were just trying to break me. So I played along, and I didn't realize till they put handcuffs on me and took off my belt and said, "Okay, follow this line. You're going to federal prison." I couldn't believe it. And anyway, that was the material Brad had tried to get, where they buried it, hid it, and threw him in jail. And that's Covington and Burling, and that's yet to come out. Incidentally, all of this is shared with Fox News and shared with Dianne Feinstein, shared with Bill Nelson, shared with Lindsey Graham, shared with Chuck Grassley, whose chief of staff became Brad Birkenfeld's lawyer, incidentally, at Cohn and Colapinto.
Grassley's chief of staff.
Yes, yeah.
Why haven't they acted on any of this stuff, Scott?
No, they haven't. They haven't
Why?
touched it.
Why?
They haven't touched it. A lot of these politicians have Swiss bank accounts. A lot of them get a lot of black budget money, secret money. I think that's the real reason. There's a lot of actors and people that Brad talked about having Swiss bank accounts. So it's a very deep, hidden source of wealth, and there's a lot of money there. That's why Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Loretta Lynch and Stuart Eisenstadt buried all of this. And Dov Zakheim's son, Roger Zakheim, in 2014 took a job with Covington and Burling. What's interesting about that, Jason, is before he took a job at Covington and Burling, he was at the House Armed Services Committee as the general counsel.
Roger
and he was receiving my reports from a military officer pleading for the military to step in and really rescue me, pleading with the military to look into this, pleading with the military to examine the bank accounts that Brad Birkenfeld had given me because I was a terrorist finance officer. Right. I did this for a living. And I knew instantly all of the permeations and the potential of shutting these terrorist financing accounts. I mean, Jason, the way to understand this is clear and present danger in many, many ways. It's saddening. I've used some of those reflections, but specifically the core of clear and present danger is the president going after stolen drug money and wanting to confiscate it, wanting to make it his own, saying to Jack Ryan, "Go down there and get us our money. This is our money." Well, that was the attitude of Hillary Clinton, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer. We're going to go in and get all this money that Brad Birkenfeld has given us. We're going to take it. We're going to extort and threaten everybody who has a Swiss bank account and say, "You either give us half or you're going to jail, and we're going to take it all." It all went that way. And Brad Birkenfeld, we're going to throw him in jail, Swiss embassy. And the Swiss wanted that, so they put Birkenfeld in jail. They also sent Chinese Uyghur terrorists back up into Switzerland, which have now made their way back into Syria.
Well, let me pause you for a second here, Scott, because there's a lot of questions. First thing I want to do is let's look at Roger Zakheim, because each of these guys you're mentioning have very rich and quite interesting backgrounds. Just a quick Google of Roger Zakheim reveals that, I don't know if he presently is, but the first things that come up, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, the National Defense Industrial Association, the Alexander Hamilton Society. I mean, this guy's busy. He's part of AEI.org. Where does he find the time to do all this? He's a former deputy staff director, as you said, for the House Armed Services Committee. I mean, he seems to be neck deep in the military-industrial complex and all kinds of think tanks and clubs and interesting things that have him rubbing elbows with military, both the government and the corporate aspects of all this. And of course, Dov Zakheim was a member of a team called the Vulcans that was led by, what's her name there? Condoleezza Rice. They were advisors to George W. Bush prior to 9/11. What do we know about Dov Zakheim and Roger Zakheim having dual citizenship with Israel? Is that true?
Well, I've heard it's true.
How do we verify something like that?
You would have to look at the Immigration and Naturalization Service to track down their social security numbers and find out their birth certificate,
date of birth. Is it public information?
Well, in the days of Google, it may be public information. You may be able to access it, but specifically going through the old routes, you'd go through NCIS National Immigration and Customs and Support agencies. You could theoretically go through the State Department as well. College records and such would have it, but there may be a tool that you can use for dual citizenship reporting.
Reading up for what we were going to talk about today, Scott, I was looking into Dov Zakheim quite a bit, and he's been involved in government for a long, long time. He's Roger's father, of course, and it seems that all these things, they're family businesses. Dov Zakheim, years ago, was pivotal in terminating an Israeli jet development project, and he wanted Israel to purchase U.S. F-16s. And I don't know if there's inherently anything nefarious about that, but it seems like a lot of deals being made. I do recall when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, Sirhan Sirhan, his official claim was that he was very upset by Robert Kennedy's support for the delivery of jets, U.S. jets to Israel to bomb Palestine or something like this. I hear all these things and I wonder if there are connections. Was Dov Zakheim active back then in 1968 when RFK was assassinated? Did that RFK Sirhan jet situation have anything to do with Dov Zakheim?
Well, what I know about Sirhan, there was claims that he was not the shooter. There was a second shooter because the bloodstains and the walking path of Kennedy was inconsistent with the reports. So there is a theory that he was assassinated by another person. I think it may have been Secret Service or someone, but they had put a gun close to his lower right ear, and I'll have to dig up some of the intel on that again.
Well, there were powder burns on his hair from a point-blank shot right behind him, and Sirhan was in front of him, at least 6 feet away. Sirhan had a revolver that, of course, contained 6 bullets, but there were 8 bullet holes at the location. 2 bullet holes were in a door frame that was cut and removed, that door frame left. So definitely a lot of questions. And I just, it's what we're learning a lot about lately, Scott, is that so many of these people that we hear about in the news, whether it's James Comey or Rod Rosenstein, they seem like new people to the general public because we haven't heard too much about them. But when you go back into their history, these guys have been in government 20, 30, 40 years, some of them longer. And I think we really need to examine the interrelationships and the interactions between all these people to really get a picture. We still don't know what happened on 9/11, who was behind it, who orchestrated it, who financed it, to whose benefit. You obviously were delivering information that could have provided critical answers to some of these questions, and you were thrown in jail. Your reports have been ignored. How can we really dig into this stuff, Scott?
Well, Dov Zakheim was my boss at U.S. Central Command. He was running the terrorist threat financing operations at the Joint Interagency Operations Center, which was a coordination group. And I can't go too much into it because it was a classified situation. But
why would we allow someone with dual citizenship with any country to be in charge of such a heavily classified defense program in the United States? Don't we want someone who's fully dedicated to the United States?
Well, you certainly do, but if it's not required by law and there's no form or line to fill out or box to check out, they don't know that. And Dov Zakheim was the Booz Allen Hamilton senior director who was in charge of this contract. And he was the one really tracking where all the money sources and the bank accounts and the Swiss banks and the Saudi banks and the Asian banks and the Iranian banks, all of that was run by our team. We knew, and I can't go into some of the specifics, but the general strokes of terrorist financing I can, and that is that Booz Allen Hamilton had the dominant contract on that, and Dov Zakheim was the director of that. Now, before Booz Allen Hamilton, he wasn't liked at Booz Allen Hamilton. My boss, Colonel Jeff Jones, was the one who briefed me and trained me, and I can't go much into that either, about going down to work for Zakheim and his larger questionable character. And it connects directly back to the Pentagon when he was comptroller at the Pentagon, and
this guy's been everywhere.
The speech of Rumsfeld of $2.3 trillion being missing. And that area of the Pentagon that was hit by the missile, where the auditors were killed examining the money trail of the missing $2.3 trillion and the internal explosions that happened inside the Pentagon, according to Barbara Honegger, which I think is absolutely truthful. I think Barbara's work has been, stellar in examining the Pentagon strike. And I drove by the Pentagon the next day, Jason, and I can say with absolute unfailing truthfulness, there was no plane anywhere on the Pentagon lawn. There was no skid mark. There was no plane impact point. There was no engine holes in the side of the building. There was just one big hole that was covered up with a big blue tarp, but there was no plane anywhere. So it's consistent with the prior reports that were scrubbed from the internet that the reporters made when they exited the building and went outside and said, "Look, there's no plane." And then their feeds were cut off. So there may have been a plane shot, blown up. There may have been a plane flying over it. But I think the truth is there was no plane that actually hit the Pentagon. It was most likely a missile strike combined with an internal bombs that went off. But that was Dov Zakheim's connection. He was the comptroller in charge of the financial examination. So you're beginning to see through a glass darkly these opaque connections and dots, but they're very there. They're there. The broad strokes are there, and I was there in the middle of it. Dov Zakheim's name and in the documents are in my book Shell Game. So you see Dov Zakheim's signature. You see him. You see his role. You see Booz Allen Hamilton. You see the terrorist financing operations and connections that we had. And I don't talk about anything classified, but what I can reveal is what Brad Birkenfeld gave to me, which connected directly to the work I was doing at U.S. Central Command. It was as if White Hats had said, "Bennett, we need to send you into the belly of the beast to find and get the evidence to put into a report and send up the military chain of command," which is exactly what I did. And it went to Mattis, it went to Flynn, it went to U.S. Central or Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command, it went to the Armed Services Committees on the House and the Senate, and instantly it provoked a aggressive counter-reaction among some people. Specifically, Senator Bill Nelson of Florida wrote Dianne Feinstein, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, about me and saying, how did this Scott Bennett get this information?
Right.
Who is he? How did he get this clearance? It's almost as if, Jason, they expect you to be castrated in your passion and your will and your manly aggression to fight wars, kill enemies, and do good for the Constitution. They expect all that to be destroyed, cut off, when you get a clearance and when you enter some echelon of military intelligence service. That never happened to me because I didn't go in as a grunt and work my way up. I went in as a direct commission. There's only a few people in the country that get that. But I got it through my boss, Colonel Jeff Jones, because he liked me and he knew me and he liked how I think. And I think he knew that I was going to be a pit bull that went in and didn't stop. I didn't back down. I didn't retreat. I was there to win a war. And I took an oath to the Constitution. I didn't take it to the military. I didn't take it to the president. I took it to the Constitution. That's what separates officers from enlisted. That's why we have such a dismal failure, and I think the feed looks like it went down.
Well, that's what I wanted to show you, Scott, is that every day when I do this show, I'm monitoring the show on YouTube, and you're right. It's, this doesn't happen usually, but it's saying an error occurred, and this has happened throughout the broadcast. I've been having a real reduction in the number of views to most of the videos that we put out lately, and I've begun to wonder if there isn't some sort of outside interference. We continue to be broadcasting, and if I just refresh the page, it should come back, but something is happening that's trying to disrupt the normal operation. You can see the video is still going, so we're all right for now, but that is certainly very curious. Let me bring you back to General Flynn, because I really feel like he is a critical part of this whole entire situation. He was the first member of President Trump's cabinet to be targeted and pushed out. And see, you're saying things that resonate with me because I've been speaking to such a wide range of people on the show, and it's one of the things that I really like about Crowdsource the Truth, because you've got all of your military and intelligence background, and then I speak to people with vast and varied backgrounds who maybe don't know the same things that you know, but when I see connective pieces, it causes me to wonder. So you're talking about a situation where you essentially got railroaded. You got an attorney who's connected to all of the things that you were trying to expose, and it seems that that attorney, based on the motions that you're describing in your ongoing case, failed to serve you properly in the way that an attorney should. And I'm concerned that the same thing is happening to Michael Flynn. I also have a guest who's been on the show several times named Michael Barden, who is a self-described targeted individual who's in the midst of a criminal trial where he's been wrongly accused of assault with a gun or something like that. He was driving in his car and somebody pointed a gun at him, and then he was arrested, and he's now going through a trial where he tells me he doesn't trust his lawyer. So I become very concerned that we have these sort of kind of cliques of lawyers that know each other, that are connected to these guys, that are connected to these military industrial corporations like Booz Allen Hamilton, like Boeing, like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, and they seem to have these back channels where they can somehow recommend lawyers to people. And when someone is under legal pressure, it's very common for them to feel extremely nervous, because going to jail for 5 or 10 years or even a year is a major disruption to anyone's life. If you're married or if you're, whatever it is, it just basically is robbing a piece of your life. What is going on here, Scott? How is this all happening, and how can we identify it and stop it?
Well, you hit a very important part, and one of the other things I found out, I hadn't picked David Shalala, Donna Shalala's nephew. He had been assigned. He was brought in by the first attorney that I had hired, a guy named Ariel Cohen, and or Ariel Garcia. I'm sorry, Ariel Garcia.
Much different.
And he had brought in David Shalala and said, "I'm going to bring this guy in. He's well connected. He's political. He's this and that and this and that." And Donna Shalala's nephew. I said, "Okay." Again, I thought this was a test, and I thought this was all going to be thrown out. And I honestly thought someone was going to open the door and say, "Lieutenant Bennett, get in this room. You passed the test. You're now going to Afghanistan in a TSSCI capacity. This was to endure you. I mean, they do that, and I've been through things like that. So this wasn't. I mean, this wasn't this wasn't anything that I expected. Yeah, that's Ariel Garcia, and he brought in David Shalala, and David Shalala, kind of said the same thing. Oh, well, this is a big misunderstanding. Just keep your head down. Don't say a word. Don't say anything.
Right.
And I didn't say anything, and no papers, no documents, nothing was put in my defense. I was writing and scribbling down in the book and passing it to the attorney. Say this, say this, say this, ask this, because they had the Booz Allen Hamilton guys up there. They had Wackenhut too. Here's the other weird thing, and it was CIA all over the place.
Yeah.
Wackenhut was brought in as a guard, saying that I dressed up as a police uniform at Fort Myer in Virginia. And I thought, this is way off the wall. I told the lawyers, I never did that. I'm a military officer. I can go into a base anytime I want. Why would I dress as a police officer? But they brought in this Wackenhut false affidavit from this guard, and then they retracted it from the judge. But they still rang the bell and threw in, this garbage to discolor the whole court scene. So
was there a jury that heard that, Scott?
Pardon me?
Was there a jury that heard that?
No, the jury didn't hear it. The judge did, though. The judge did, and the judge was Virginia Hernandez Covington. That's the other big thing to bring in. Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, that has connections to Covington and Burling through her prior marriage. So Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, who heard this case, that was presided over, she presided over it, but was argued by David Shalala, who is the nephew of Donna Shalala, who's tied to one of the major parties that I couldn't expose at the time as a terrorist financing suspect or a target of our surveillance until Brad Birkenfeld disclosed it. Donna Shalala, David Shalala, Judge Virginia Hernandez Covington, yes, that's her. Covington and Burling, the law firm that Dov Zakheim, who was Booz Allen Hamilton's head guy, Dov Zakheim was connected to Covington and Burling through his son, Roger Zakheim, and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer, who were in charge of the Justice Department that prosecuted me. So
Scott, it's almost like you're painting a picture of essentially a shadow Justice Department, because it seems like at some point a bunch of smart lawyer-type corporate guys got together and said, this Constitution, it's such a pain in the ass. It stops us from putting guys like Scott Bennett right in jail. How can we come up with a complex network and elaborate mechanism to circumvent all this, and let's just not tell anybody about it? It seems like they've got their tentacles into the courts as far as Florida, New York, Washington, D.C., all over the country, and they've got a way of taking the unsuspecting, possibly nervous, fearful for their freedom target, which is, in this case, you, and getting you right in the position where they want you, where their people handle everything, the lawyers, the judges. We've heard from Brian Vukadinovich, who was a pro se litigant, where he was the plaintiff against the school board there in Illinois. The police had targeted him. Initially, there was a case of mistaken identity where he was arrested and he was exonerated by the judge, and apparently the judge chastising the police didn't sit well with the police, and they began targeting Brian. And in his case against the school board, the police had him fired from his job as a teacher. And the judge in the case was adamant that Brian take a lawyer. The judge was even recommending a lawyer, saying he would get him a lawyer, and Brian refused. So I think it's important that we talk about this, and everyone that has firsthand experience in this regard, share their firsthand experience. If you don't trust your lawyer, that's an incredibly dangerous situation to be in.
Yeah, well, you nailed it right on the head. And let me start to empower people with the skills and knowledge and vicarious experience that they need to survive these sort of situations. Number one, the Constitution of the United States is your shield and your sword. The Constitution of the United States is the inviolable law of the land that is only changed through the amendment process. The Constitution of the United States is supreme over every single state law, every code, every statute, every single other thing is subservient to the Constitution of the United States. So people have to learn it backwards and forwards. Specifically, your rights, your privileges, your immunities, your absolute inviolable freedoms that no one can violate, including when you're driving and a police officer pulls you over. You do not have to say anything. You don't have to say a single word. You can simply put a piece of paper up that says, I refuse to speak, I refuse to give any material, anything that could be used against me in a court of law.
Well, what about your driver's license?
Constitutional rights, and I am waiving none of them.
But what about your driver's license? When the cops stop you, you got to show...
You don't have to give them a driver's license either. You have a right to travel. You are not driving. You are not engaged in commercial activity. That's another argument that other lawyers have been making, like Stephen Pidgeon and others, that this whole driver's license is originally for drivers like delivery trucks or taxis or places that are making, people in places that are making money. But when you travel, you are exercising your federal constitutional right, and you are not engaging in commerce. You're not engaging in profit. You are not required to have a driver's license. You are traveling. Now, it is an extortion racket, and they've got away with it. If people have been over these decades fooled into believing that they have to have a license for finance, it's a shakedown. But if someone pulls you over, your best statement is, if you're a little old lady and they're pulling you over, that's one thing, but you'll always get a ticket. But you're always best to say, I do not answer questions. I assert my constitutional rights. I am not driving. I am not engaged in commercial activity. I will not be making any statement. I will not be giving any paper that can be used against me in a court of law. I'm asserting my constitutional rights to privacy and silence.
But what if you're speeding?
The Supreme Court has ruled that they cannot force you to answer their questions. They cannot if they suspect you of a crime, then they are pulling you over under suspicion of a crime. They have to have a warrant for you for that. And absent that, they try and put together a case using your own information. That's why you don't answer questions.
But what if you're speeding?
Well, you still don't answer questions. They'll give you the ticket, for speeding and tell you to.
Got it.
You're going to be called to court to give an answer for this. But you're innocent until proven guilty. They could be sitting back drinking coffee and say, you know what, I don't like that yellow Pinto. I'm going to give it a speeding ticket. You could be going 50 miles an hour. And they just give it to you and say, okay, you're speeding, right? You don't answer their question. You don't even look at them. You can say and roll your window halfway down. No, I'm not going to be making any statements. I'm not driving. I'm not engaged in commercial activity. But I'll be raising this in a court of law if need be. But I'm not making any statements. I'm not giving you any further information. But the Constitution is what people need to rely upon because it's a psychological pressure warfare. They try and come in and threaten you and say, we're going to give you 1,000 years because you stepped on the purple frog and it's an endangered species, so cop a plea. Take a 5-year plea now. And that's how they get away with this. They get all sorts of money for getting plea deals. And I saw so many guys that happened to, and you're right, because when you have wives and children and property and homes, and you can't risk a divorce and all that stuff, you take a plea. Right. And that's what Michael Flynn did. He took a plea to avoid something bigger. Now, let's flash forward. There are some weird things that are happening in this country, Jason, that we don't know yet what's really going on, because what's happening with Flynn and Mueller and the Justice Department and the Jeff Sessions and the investigation into this Russia probe that never was. There's a weird thing that happened to Flynn, and Flynn knows where the bodies are buried. He knows where the terrorist financing happened. He knows about the Clintons. He had access. I mean, he was the head of the CIA for the military.
DIA,
he knows all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And this Mueller thing against him and representing Covington and Burling is very weird. I would like to think it's a secret spy operation where he's embedding himself in Covington to blow it up from the inside out. I'd like to think that Mueller is secretly working for Trump, as is Sessions. I don't know. The court of public opinion constantly paints Mueller and Sessions and Rosenstein in a very poisonous, dead light. People have said they have so much stuff on Mueller from 9/11 that he's doing this so he hasn't killed, executed for the treason he did during the 9/11 thing. Who knows what the reality is? But I think we always move forward based on what we're seeing and hearing in reality that every other American is seeing and hearing. Right. We may be a little bit above because we're analyzing this very carefully and we know the machinations and the backdrop, but the broad strokes are very unnerving. That this is a deep state operation against Trump, and Trump needs to really protect himself from these operations. The Mueller, the Sessions, the probe, the Rosenstein, Michael Flynn. Again, he should divorce himself from his attorneys because they're totally unqualified to represent him. But absent that, he's going to take a plea deal. He hasn't been sentenced yet, though, Jason. Yeah. That's the weird thing too. They pushed off his sentencing. So.
And that's Mueller that's doing that pushing off. It seems to be some strategic move. It's very difficult to know why these guys are doing what they do. And just to interject something to one of the points you've just raised, it's not merely the court of public opinion that's painting Rosenstein and these other guys in a negative light. These guys have been swirling around the Clintons for decades. They've failed to investigate legitimate, questionable activity. I mean, I'll go as far as saying crimes. Every week, Charles Ortel is presenting a new array of evidence that any one of these things would seem to be sufficient to put a regular person in jail for many, many years. And all of the names that you've just listed, James Comey, Robert Mueller, Rod Rosenstein, each of these guys have not only failed to investigate these activities, they seem very connected to a network of people that are working to cover these activities, much in the way the Zackheims and the other people that you've described seem to be as well. And let's get back to Dov and Roger Zackheim for a moment. Here we see Roger Zackheim at the Reagan National Defense Forum. Scott, what's the story with all these think tanks? We've heard about the Project for a New American Century, the Council on Foreign Relations, the London Center for Public Policy. What the hell are all of these things? How do you get into them? What do they do once you're in them? What do we not know about these organizations?
Well, a lot of them are feeding off of the nostalgia of a Reagan America, the Reagan Americas, the sitting on the hill, the leader of the world, the policeman of the world, if you will, the entrepreneurial, capitalistic metropolis of the world that has a moral duty by God to go forth into all the world and civilize the barbarian, destroy the dictator, and erect, little Americas, and classify them as partner nations around the world. And they do it with a religious, a pseudo-religious zeal that is dripping with this nostalgic American country western, almost, self-intoxication or bromide that leads them into this delusional foreign policy pursuit. So the think tanks have a lot of money that pursue this sort of a foreign policy. I was at the Heritage Foundation. I was at the Leadership Institute. When I worked in Heritage, I worked in social domestic policy. Though I didn't focus on the international, although we were all sort of jumbled together. But I really had real conservatives from the Reagan team that were looking at the family, domestic policy, correlations to policy and criminality, all sorts of health and human services issues. And that's where I started from when I was doing my doctorate at Catholic University. And I was Scottish Presbyterian when I was raised, but I went to Catholic because they had a political theory department. And then I went into the Bush administration. So you go think tank, academia, then the Bush administration, and then you work in these policy areas. And you have people that have this zealous tunnel vision pursuit of American expansionism all over the world. There's a great book by one of my advisors, Klaus Rinn, called America the Virtuous, The Rise and Fall of the American Empire, and it was written in 2003. And everything that he said has come to pass.
Wow.
So Roger Zakheim went to the Reagan National Forum after he left Covington and Burling. And to be honest with you, Jason, I think he left Covington and Burling because of everything that I had exposed and started stirring up. And that will all come out, of course, in a court hearing where all of these people and organizations will be subpoenaed, and I will be representing myself as well as with other attorneys. I know Larry Klayman, and Larry Klayman and I have talked about this and debriefed him extensively on this. I've talked to Charles Ortel about this, talked to many, many other people. I won't go into the details for their sake, but this is widely known in the American legal community of what they've done to Brad Birkenfeld and did to me. And it's at the heart of the deep state cover-up of the Clinton crimes, because it was the first great crime that Clinton did when she entered office in the State Department. It's bigger than Uranium One, because it involves financing Wahhabi terrorists into Libya, into Syria. Let me make one side note regarding the financing of terrorists into Libya and Syria. In Libya, there was a couple called James and Joanne Moriarty that Michael Flynn knew. They were in Libya as oil people. They did oil technology. They were close to the tribes. And they were in Libya when all hell broke loose, and NATO and the U.S. started attacking Libya. The Moriartys were in Libya at the time. They escaped. They were caught by Al-Qaeda along with a lot of other foreign people. They were slotted to be executed. They were miraculously rescued by the Russians, no less.
Wow.
And they made it out of country. And the CIA and the FBI and all sorts of agency people were baffled about how they got out. And they were desperate to try and get as much information out of the Moriartys as possible, because the Moriartys saw that it was all NATO, Obama, Clinton, Sarkozy, Cameron, Wahhabi, Qatari forces that were engaged in this murder of Gaddafi and the overthrow of the government, the theft of gold and the theft of oil. That Benghazi issue happened on September 11th, 2012.
Yeah.
That was the very same day that they paid off Brad Birkenfeld $104 million. So I saw that as a coordinated deception operation to make something happen over here so you didn't see something else happen over here. And I think Birkenfeld's payoff was a big part of it. But the Moriartys are someone that you need to have on your show. I think you'd be really delighted to speak with them. They were basically intelligence assets on the ground, although they didn't work for the intelligence agency.
What do you mean by that?
But they're Texans.
What do you mean that they were intelligence assets on the ground, but they didn't work for the intelligence agencies? They were unwitting assets?
They acquired information that a good intelligence asset would acquire, but they were oil people. They were like Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves. They went out to Libya to sell oil technology for certain oil recycling or something to that effect. They had been trying to develop business there, and they were known by the tribes as just good American investors and entrepreneurs. It's a wife and a husband, and they were on the ground and getting real information about the culture, the society, the politics, the whole psychographic dimension of Libya. And General Michael Flynn had described the Moriartys. He had been called down to answer at Congressman Pete Sessions' office. Yeah, that's their website. Michael Flynn had been called down to Pete Sessions' office to give an account of the Moriartys. And that's where he used the term. They are the best intelligence assets that America could have, but they were civilians. They weren't military or intelligence people. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But they have been soft killed. They have been blackballed by the CIA, by the FBI. And here's the thing, Jason. The FBI just interviewed the Moriartys a few days ago about Jerome Corsi and WikiLeaks. And apparently Mueller is investigating what the Moriartys know about all of this broader stuff. I've talked to them.
What do the Moriartys know about
you
Dr.
tell the FBI to come talk to me. You tell the FBI that I'm happy to corroborate your information and all sorts of other things. And I'll also say I went down to my congressman's office, Mark DeSaulnier, and I gave him my request to testify to the FBI about Dianne Feinstein's cover-up of terrorist financing and how it fits the pattern for what she did with the Blasey Ford cover-up.
Yes. Talk to us about that.
So I went in there and videotaped it. My third delivery of documents to Congressman Mark Dusaulnier. The first time was in August 1st, 2016, about Shell Game and Clinton's cover-up of terrorist financing. Mark Dusaulnier has done absolutely nothing purposefully. So I went in last Friday and went into his office and videotaped it and said, "This is for Mark Dusaulnier. He's expecting it. He needs to present this to the FBI." And through his office, I want his office to be the liaison for me to the FBI to testify about this report, about Dianne Feinstein and her cover-up of my report and her communications with Senator Bill Nelson, who is running for office in Florida again, by the way. Senator Bill Nelson and his communication to Dianne Feinstein and the resulting cover-up of this material, which Dianne Feinstein did as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Mind you, I'm not reporting that a cat is stuck in a tree. I'm reporting that terrorist financing is being conducted through Swiss banks, and I'm a military officer that did terrorist financing, so I know a little bit about what I'm talking about.
And these Dianne representatives refuse to take your information up the chain. So this is very serious, because people like Dianne Feinstein and Mark Dusaulnier are supposed to represent the people of the United States of America. And when an individual like yourself demonstrates excessive bravery by joining the military, getting involved in fighting terrorism, discovering the information that's actually difficult to discover and necessary for us to protect this country, you bring it to the lawmakers that have the ability to take action on this intelligence, and not only are they doing nothing, they're suppressing your information, they're putting you in jail, they're targeting the individuals that are connected to delivering this information to you, like Brad Birkenfeld and certainly General Michael Flynn. And they're getting these guys, including you, roped into these crazy legal scenarios where you're forced to defend your life to the extent that you can't possibly be engaged in the important business of delivering this information to Congress and getting the president to act on it. This is so serious, Scott. It's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on today, because we've discussed these things, all of them, in the past, but it's important to reiterate them, to re-examine them, to compare them, as you just did, to the current activities of this whole, I mean, let's call it what it is, the psychological operation of Blasey Ford and her coming in with her highly emotional testimony that everyone considered credible. You know, I go and watch a movie with, Gary Oldman in it, and he gives a credible performance. It's very believable, but he's still acting. It's not the truth. So I think it's very important. And you spoke about the Constitution. I wasn't crazy about Brett Kavanaugh as a choice for U.S. Supreme Court because of some of the decisions that he's written relative to the Fourth Amendment, his involvement with George W. Bush in the creation of the Patriot Act, and his opinions relative to what is unreasonable search and seizure or not. I'm open to discussing those things and having a public debate about them, but I was so upset that his confirmation turned away from all that towards this, at best, very shaky testimony from someone who was admittedly 15 and drinking beer at the time. Now, 15-year-olds aren't supposed to be drinking beer, and I'm not trying to blame this alleged victim for drinking the beer. I'm just saying you might be impaired if you're 15 and drinking a beer, and that might affect your ability to remember things 36 years later. I was shocked to see the national reaction and this senator who said that you have the right to be believed. That is wrong. You're a constitutionalist. You've read the Constitution. Is there anywhere in there that it says that everyone has the right to be believed?
Yeah, no, it's a terrible, terrible precedent that I'm glad has failed miserably. And I share your reservations about Kavanaugh. I have exactly the same ones for exactly the same reasons. But the mockery and the attack on males and men should just sit down and shut up. And the real implications of this and the hijacking, the attacking of white women, it's now being labeled. This is a societal Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde moment. We're witnessing the complete schizophrenic meltdown of the left and its violent agenda. And Hillary Clinton backs that by saying, surrender to us and we'll be civil again. Civility only will come when we win the election. So you better surrender and then we'll be civil. That's essentially what she said at the London interview she did the other day. It was on Tucker Carlson. I watched it. And it's intolerable, and we can never back down to that, because it's a bloodthirsty hatred for all family and religious impulses and peaceful impulses. The liberal leftist agenda is a monstrous deformity, and it represents nothing to what classic liberalism ever represented. I'll say one thing. Michael Flynn was charged with making a false statement, 18 U.S.C. 100-1.
Right.
That's the same thing they charged me with. So Michael Flynn, if he was sentenced, his sentencing guidelines, Jason, would be 0 months in jail to maybe a year. That's it. If he was found guilty, because they can't give him 5 years in jail, and that's the maximum. They have to give him what the sentencing guidelines prescribe. And because he's never done anything in his life, the sentencing guidelines would put him into that bracket of 0 to 7 months, most likely, if not 0 to 5 months. So he wouldn't even go to jail. The reason they put me in jail is because they gave me a gun enhancement, because I had my own guns in my own gun safe, and they gave me an enhancement as if I'd committed a crime with a gun. Wow. So they twist these things in Twilight Zone ways that you couldn't imagine.
Well, it's the weaponization. It's the weaponization of our justice system, and it's very, very troubling. I want to take you back.
Always remember this. You can file a civil suit against anybody, any government that violates your civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 242 and 42 U.S.C. 1983, 84, and 85. 42 U.S.C. 83, 84, and 85 is how you get money out of anyone that you sue for violating your civil rights or falsely arresting you and that sort of thing. It's very important to remember that.
And of course, your book, Shell Game, is all about your experience in the Army as the psychological operations expert. Before we wrap it up for today, I do want to encourage people to pick up the book, Shell Game, but I want to take you back to this Blasey Ford psychological operation, because you just said something that stuck with me. I want to try to avoid making this a white male or a man versus woman kind of a thing. For me, the issue was the challenge to the Constitution and this notion that everyone has the right to be believed. That's been put on a pillar well above the actual right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. And that's a right that everyone in this country enjoys and should jealously protect. Man, woman, child, black, white, whatever, because as soon as we lose that, as you said, even with that in place, you've been wrongly accused and jailed. Michael Barden is now facing that. Cliven Bundy and his sons face that. People are so caught up in the emotional, psychological aspects of some of these accusations and some of these, let's call them dramatizations, yes, that they're losing sight of the things that we actually should be fighting for. Our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights. The Constitution is under assault, and they've got everyone distracted with this psychological operation of the testimony of essentially an actress who has coached other people as to how to manipulate these polygraph tests, how to suppress body language when you're speaking, to cover deceptions. This is so serious, Scott. What can you say to us before we close it out for this afternoon?
Well, her voice was calculated to give the feeling that she was on the verge of a mental breakdown and a tearful, sobbing cry. That's why no one asked her hard questions. That was a calculated manipulation of her voice, so that everyone thought she was about to break down. When she said, the whole time her voice was on that cusp of the waterfall. I knew it was a fake actress. I knew she didn't have tears in her eyes. She never wiped them once. She never had any quivering lip. We look at the lawyers. Here's the other thing.
Oh, yeah.
Deborah Katz is connected to POGO, Project on Government Oversight. Project on Government Oversight was connected to Brad Birkenfeld and the Swiss bank reports that we sent up to POGO. And POGO was the lawyer that Dianne Feinstein recommended to Ford.
Wow.
Ford has all sorts of alleged CIA connections through her father. Her father ran the bank that was connected to the CIA, allegedly. So there's other things of the deep state that we see in the background that gives this the impression that it was a deep state operation using FBI, CIA that most likely will be connected to John Brennan and others.
Oh, yeah.
These people have been 8 years in the Obama administration, have been embedded in the government, in the CIA, in the FBI, and the DOJ, and they've been working these angles. So, everyone needs to be examined. Everyone needs to be subpoenaed and reviewed. And I think we're going to see that after the November elections. And I hope and pray that it stays in the Republican column, because then it will all come out. And I think we'll see a major turn in a good direction by the Trump administration after the November elections. But Jason, if we lose the election to the fascism of these Democrat leftists, and they're not even Democrats, I mean, they're leftist hysterics, this country would have some hard times. So I'm hoping that the American people have witnessed this maniacy and will never allow that to come to power. And it's good to see some people standing up, even though I disagree with them on some things, like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. It's good to see that they rise up and at least got something passed that will serve a conservative court, that will help keep the culture healthy and conservative in some of these values. And yes, we need to steer away from the police state and these endless wars and the 9/11 self-inflicted wound to justify all that. That should be examined in the Nuremberg hearing. But I think if we keep in November, Trump will take a major change. And I'm glad Nikki Haley is leaving too, because I think a man needs to replace her, and someone with a Tillerson temperament that's more of a peacemaker. And Dick Black was over in Syria the other day, and I'm looking forward to seeing you connect with him, because he really is excited to hear about you.
Oh, great.
But Dick Black was over in Syria, and he came back after meeting Bashar Assad, and once again is declaring Syria is not our enemy. Iraq is not Russia is not our enemy. The Wahhabists are. So
right.
That is the school we need to push in American foreign policy decision making, not this neoconservative warmongering juggernaut that has had 18 years of war and has resulted in nothing but the destruction of our reputation and our treasury.
Scott, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I want to remind everyone that they can support Scott's work by visiting patreon.com/shellgame. You can sponsor Scott. You can also purchase his book from his website. And sorry, I'm just bringing that up right here. And that's shellgamewhistleblower.com. Is that right, Scott?
That's right.
Right. So, of course, the book is Shell Game, and Scott has a new book that he's just put out, which is 9/11 Truth Memos book. Scott Bennett, always a pleasure to have you on the show, Scott. Have a great day, and we'll speak with you soon.
Thank you, Jason. It's always an honor.
I'll be back later on this evening. Charles Ortel will be closing in at 5 p.m. Don't miss that. Thanks for watching, everybody.